Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, I would like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host Mark Snyder. I'm going to start out in Contact Report 70. Reading through this, I realize how much work still needs to be done here to organize all of the contact notes that are related to Atlantis and try to actually understand what's going on here. It's a little daunting. You may remember Contact 59 I managed to get a hold of, and it's up on the website, Exopolitics, Ohio.US. And if you go under the various button, you'll see a drop-down that has Contact 59 in it. And this comes from Wendell Stevens' unauthorized translation of the 59th contact in the Billy Meyer case, which occurred on Thursday, July 8th, 1976. So I don't know how much I'm going to talk about Contact 59. It goes into great detail about the destruction of Atlantis and Lemuria. Contact Report 70 is a little different, and it talks about the time before the destruction of Atlantis and Lemuria and the time after. And sometimes that is part of the challenge the Meyer material. You don't get everything in this nice chronological order all the time. But in any case, we're talking about a time that was 133,000 years ago. And allegedly during this time, there were extraterrestrials coming to the Earth, extraterrestrial humans. And I'll start out at line 110 because up until 110 it hasn't been translated into English. And you can go to the Future Mankind site and look at Contact Report 70 yourself if you're interested in this. For 700 years, the Earth was simply avoided before the descendants of the refugees on Beta Centauri in another space-time configuration set out once again to settle the beautiful blue world. This was 132,000 years ago, according to your current chronology. So let's look at Beta Centauri. Beta Centauri, in our space-time configuration, is about 400 light years away. It's quite a distance. However, we're talking about a Beta Centauri that's in a different space-time configuration than ours. And when we talk about different space-time configurations, we're talking roughly about the term dimensions. In the latest episode, under the leadership of Atlant, the continent of Atlantis, which had been headed for again and again and was used for millennia, was expanded and made habitable. While under the command of his wife Caryatide, Lesser Atlantis came into existence. Atlant, my understanding, was an Jschwisch. He was a king of wisdom. He was a man of obvious Lyrian descent. He had broad shoulders and pasty white skin. But that information comes from, not directly from the Meyer material, but by Randy Winter's book. And my understanding is Atlantis was an island continent between South America and Africa, Europe area. And they built a tremendously beautiful architecture on this island continent. And then Miras, who was the cousin of Caryatide, built the gigantic city of Mu. And Mu, or Lemuria, was in what we call the Gobi Desert today. And there were two underground cities there as well, Agartha Alpha and Agartha Beta, and they were connected by an underground tunnel system. So let me continue here. In the latest episode, under the leadership of Atlant, the continent of Atlantis, which had been headed for again and again and used for millennia, was expanded and made habitable. So they must have been doing some kind of, I don't know if terraforming is the right word, but they were actually expanding this island. So they must have been moving water and moving land and in order to do that. And then it says here, while under the command of his wife Caryatide, Lesser Atlantis came into existence. And at the same time, her cousin Miras built the gigantic city of Mu, which, like Atlantis, also found its origin in very early times. So maybe, this was taking place 133,000 years ago. But this sounds like the second occurrence of some episode that occurred even earlier. A lot of unknowns here. I wish I had more information. The reason for the construction of these cities so far apart was that the humans had become clever through all the wars, and they hoped for peace as a result of the great distance between the cities, if everyone stayed in their domains. So it went well for many long years, a whole 1,800 years to be precise. Then again, however, some scientists exalted themselves, whipped up by power lust, and they tried to snatch up control for themselves. This time, however, they had not reckoned on the people's memory of war, which had been passed down over the ages. So before the scientists could strike, the people rose up against them. So these scientists, these kings of wisdom, they tried to, I guess, take over. And the people fought back, and the scientists fled into the space-time shifted regions of Beta Centauri. And then it says here in line 20, this was 115,000 Earth years ago. So Atlant and Caryatide came 133,000 years ago, and the cities were expanded on. It sounded like they were already in existence. They were expanded on these cities. Like Atlantis, also found its origin in very early times. So that's interesting. So they had peace for 1,800 years. The scientists tried to take over, and they were pushed off the Earth. They fled back to Beta Centauri. That was 115,000 years ago. So there was, what we just talked about there took place in 15,000 years. And then these scientists were in Beta Centauri for 2,000 years. I assume that a lot of these scientists died off, and their progeny came back, during which the malicious refugees again created a high technical standard and produced many descendants. They returned, filled with hate, to the Earth. And this always amazes me every time I read this. I mean, after 2,000 years, why are you still filled with hate for 2,000 years? Anyway, they increased their hate immeasurably against the extraterrestrial inhabitants of Earth, and were only able to preserve order within their own ranks with terrible punishments. So these people from Beta Centauri were cruel. Spurred on through their inhuman hate, they, through the research and knowledge obtained from it, drove up their life expectancy to more than 1,000 years. So they were perhaps doing genetic engineering or some kind of technology to expand their life. And after 2,000 years, their single wish was to gain control over the Earth, for which reason every individual was taught wicked intrigues, instructed in the craft of war. They had nothing better to do for 2,000 years. Unbelievable. After 2,000 years, this hate-drenched people was so far along that it could venture an attack on Earth. Therefore, it manned its ships and came newly to the Earth And indeed, under the Jschwisch named Arus the Barbarian, and I've talked about him many times. Arus the Barbarian. He was a king of wisdom, but not of the spiritual teachings. He was a king of wisdom in terms of his technical knowledge, and this was 113,000 years ago. Arus was extremely bestial and barbarous in his disposition, and his power was feared. Okay, now we're going to refer to Pelagon. Like Pelagon, already thousands of years before, Arus also had 200 high-grade scientists with him, which he made sub-leaders. So, Atlantis was about 133,000 years ago. If we go back farther, to 150,000 years ago, Pelagon came to the earth. Pelagon was a king of wisdom, but he was benevolent. Okay, let's continue with the story here. In a lightning action, they fell upon the earth, and we're talking about Arus the Barbarian and his group, this 200 high-grade scientists. And they conquered the distant. They fell upon the earth, robbing, murdering, and taking possession of the land. Primarily, they conquered the distant land in the northern regions where the climate was moderate and very good. These were the regions which were traditionally known to you as Hyperborea, in which they were far in the north before an upset of the earth shifted its axis, so that the then regions exist today where you name Florida. So Arus the Barbarian came from Beta Centauri with his 200 leaders and sub-leaders. They attacked the earth, and they first took over Hyperborea, which was in the North Pole region, which unbelievably had a fantastically warm climate. They took that area over, and Arus' son then, we're going to learn about now, Arus, coming from the north, Arus' son, Arus II, set out and fell upon the lands which today you call India, Pakistan, and Persia, and so forth, whereby they struck the earliest forefathers of the Sumerians, who, peace-loving, fled and set down far in the north, a people of dark-colored skin, but by your terms not Negroid, but like Europeans and of tall growth, risen from a race of former Syrian refugees, who had likewise settled on the earth 133,000 years ago, as did the refugees from the Pleiadian system. Named after Arus II, India of today was at that time called Aryan, A-R-I-E-N, which, however, split off from Hyperborea after a few centuries, after 210 centuries to be exact, and joined with the inhabitants of Mu and Agartha. While from Hyperborea, Arus I constantly troubled Mu and Greater Atlantis by wicked war activities in order to become their ruler. During around half a millennia, or very precisely 502 years, these war machinations, until Arus I, who in the meanwhile had become old and weak, succeeded in infiltrating wicked elements of his hater humans into the leading controlling ranks of Atlantis and Mu, who secretly stirred up violence and hate for so long, as also did their descendants over several centuries, until through boundless intrigues, Mu and Atlantis were able to be completely destroyed some centuries later, while the only few survivors were beaten into servitude. However, great scientists in knowledge of the coming things and the conscious of their powerlessness set off in spaceships and fled toward the early home worlds in the Pleiadian systems, where they were affably received. And I indeed do not speak yet again about the destruction of Atlantis and Mu, because you will find that as a separate chronicle in the explanations given to you. Well, those explanations are given in detail in Contact 59, which I was amazingly able to convert into text and then into a web page. In some of the information here is a bit of an overlap with Contact Report 70. Okay, let me pick up here in Contact Report 59, where they're talking about Hyperborea, which is kind of where we were. This in the present Florida, which first came to be laying in the present South because of the change in the Earth. So there it's talking about the pole shift. There was a pole shift at one time. That's very interesting. Spreading out from there, they obtained much power, fighting all over the Earth while they constantly attacked Atlantis and Mu. It makes me wonder if there wasn't more than one pole shift. Always and always again, they attacked Greater Atlantis and Mu with the objective of taking possession of the cities by war actions. In consequence, worldwide wars raged for 2 further millenniums until they infiltrated into the ruling ranks of Atlantis and Mu. Wicked elements of the Hatermen, who secretly incited hate and power so long that by their intrigues the Greater Atlantis and Mu were completely destroyed, while the few survivors were taken into servitude, and the great scientists were able to escape in their spaceships and return to their ancient homeworlds in the 7 stars, thus to the Pleiades. Now, literally beyond the Pleiades, though, in the Pleiadian system is what they're talking about, which were first colonized by their ancient forefathers, when these left their original homeworlds in the regions of Vega in the constellation of Lyra. The nature and manner in which the Greater Atlantis and Mu were destroyed was so full of cruelties and intrigues that in the history of Earth mankind they will likely never be an equal. The intrigues cited between the Atlanteans and the inhabitants of Mu, evil-minded machinations, which caused the mutual war activities. Between both arose a wicked hate and a will for destruction. Mu was situated in the desert of Gobi, made war upon Greater Atlantis, which was constructed in the Great Isle region between the present Africa and America. So it was a little south. Atlantis was south of the equator, I think, if it was between Africa and I assume South America, before it submerged in the greatest earthly war catastrophe of all, and likely as well as all future epochs, down into the Atlantic Ocean, leaving only some small islands, which you presently call the Azores. Now that is interesting. Let's find out where the Azores are. We'll take just a second here. The Azores. That's a beautiful place. Wow. The archipelago of the Azores. The Azores Islands, an autonomous region of Portugal, formed an archipelago in the mid-Atlantic and was characterized by dramatic landscapes, fishing villages, green pastures, hedgerows of blue hydrangeas. Green, volcanic, and remote islands were first settled in the 15th century and are popular for hiking, whale watching, blue marlin fishing, and diving. Very beautiful indeed. The Azores. And these say that they're composed of 9 volcanic islands in the North Atlantic Ocean. So I'm not still absolutely certain. So let me head back here. The Great War during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. The war powers of Mu and Atlantis were of horrible scale and force at their prime and were equipped with the highest technical attainments. Greater Atlantis alone disposed an army of 4.83 million, 4,830,000 men, which was well equipped with small fighter beam ships. And it goes on and it talks about this giant fleet of 123,000 one-man destroyer ships, 16,431 beam ships, which by the influence of heat could eliminate all matter in a fraction of a second. Finally, they disposed of 24,000 overkill beamers, which each needed 10 men for their manipulation. These were medium-class beam ships. So the Atlanteans attacked Mu, and they melted Mu, the city of Mu, to the ground. But the Lemurians, the people of Mu, went out to the asteroid belt, and I've told this story before, and got a small planetoid. And using atomic and electromagnetic energies, they pushed that planetoid out of place and aimed it at the Earth, and it started to rush toward the Earth. A few seconds later, after the receipt of the command on the side of the planetoid turned away from the Earth, 1,000 suns seemed to rush into the dark cosmos, and by gigantic power, the monster started moving. Rapidly, the speed of the Death's messenger increased, guided by the control of the monster scientists who, sitting on the planetoid, observed their tasks, themselves also dedicated to death. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Atlanteans destroyed the city of Mu, leveling it to the ground. I had already mentioned that. Those who had not escaped into the subterranean branch cities and into space died away in the eliminator beams of the 118 Atlanteans, and nothing witnessed any longer their once existence. The victorious Atlanteans returned to their island kingdom and celebrated their victory over Mu in great transports of joy. But their joy did not last long, because they had barely begun the festivities, which they came in over tumbling one another, announcements about the raging danger from the cosmos. Only a few high governors and scientists were able to take refuge in the spaceships and escape into the cosmos before the catastrophe broke upon Atlantis and submerged it into the sea. It's a tremendous story about how this planetoid, this asteroid, was aimed at the Earth and what it looked like when it came in. This giant burning ball of fire and this horrible howling sound it made, and the tremendous heat, 34,000 degrees. I don't know if that's, I assume Fahrenheit, I don't know. It exploded at some 172 kilometers in height and broke into many thousands of greater and smaller asteroids, meteorites, which slammed into the Earth like tactical nuclear weapons. And the whole Earth shook in this explosion, and these two gigantic pieces of the planetoid went like titanic fists into the Atlantic Ocean and opened up the crust of the Earth. The earthly crust was torn, and up came the hot, glowing magma. And this caused the ocean to kind of explode into the atmosphere, like 90,000 feet high, so which caused a gigantic tidal wave, which just wiped out Atlantis. Unbelievable, amazing story. And it says here this was exactly 11,498 years from the time of this contact. So it was 11,500 years ago. Which is hard exactly to work in with Contact Report 70, to be honest. It's really hard to put all this together. There's a lot of work someone could do here, trying to organize all this material in a chronological kind of way. Any case, that's probably enough Atlantis and Lemuria for today, because the rest of Contact Report 70 really talks about the Giza intelligences. Certainly a good thing to review at some future time. Very amazing and bizarre stuff indeed. Yes, Eve, it is very amazing. Amazing stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that I'm reading in The Way to Live. And this is on page 254. When no harmony exists between consciousness and body, the human being feels unwell, and difficulties emerge much more easily and cannot be overcome as they can when equalizedness exists. Anxious and worried, consideration about any kinds of things confuses the thoughts, for which reason a powerful and reality-based thinking ought to dissolve all anxiety and worry. And as I was talking about yesterday, the grasping and the holding are sources of our problems. We hold on to things. But grasping and holding on cannot be coordinated with the becoming and the passing. Consequently, the human does not want to come to terms with that. As soon as he or she is able to think, he or she grasps possession of the life and holds on to it with all means, whereby he or she simply pushes aside and ignores the fact of the mortality of life, because he or she associates the mortality and thereby the death with pain. So the Meyer information explains that we shouldn't be grasping and holding on to things. He talks about the human being being very much like the waves of the ocean. A wave has a beginning and an end, a becoming and a passing, a birth and a death. And just as the part piece of the creational spirit in the human being is a unity with all other creational part pieces and with the creation itself, it is also thus with the waves of the ocean, because every one of them has its own existence. So we're a part of the ocean of humanity, I guess you could say. We all have a becoming, a birth and a death, a beginning and a passing. And we should keep that in mind as we live our life. Some very unusual information in this book. He also has been talking about something called the inner self, or the true personality, the effective ego of the human being. And he says that this true personality has nothing to do with the personality which is offered and shown outwardly. Because in truth, that is no reflection of the inner self. So he's talking about this real inner self, which is connected to creation. And that somehow we also keep a delusional self-image. While the image of the personality which is brought forward outwardly is demanding and immodest and loaded with all kinds of emotions, wishes, and demands, and so forth, this outward personality thereby becomes a factor of an incessant movement of the grasping for external values, whereby the personality is delusive and conveys a false image of the self of the I. She actually precisely knows that the false external personality in reality is not existent, and that works against the truthfully inner self. These are some profound thoughts. In one of Billy's early writings, How It All Began, one thing that he says is, the truth, you'll know the truth by looking to your innermost thoughts, your innermost feelings, and your innermost self. Now today, that requires independent thinking to do that. And independent thinking is what's required for the evolution of your consciousness. We learned that in the Might of Thoughts book. But really, you can determine the truth for yourself in your innermost thoughts, your innermost feelings, and your innermost contemplations. And evidently, there's an innermost personality as well that's connected with creation. And there's also kind of a false personality that I guess we show to others, show to ourselves. I wanted to talk again about the Gemut. There's the material consciousness and the spiritual consciousness. And the spiritual consciousness is what endures over many, many lifetimes. For example, Billy's spiritual consciousness, according to the information in his writings, is 9.6 billion years old. Older than the Earth, even. Each lifetime, we get a new material consciousness. The material consciousness has a beginning and an ending, so to speak. Now, we keep part of the material consciousness. That, we store the predecessor personalities in our subconscious. We also store what are called the evolutive values in the spirit form. But really, the material consciousness has a beginning and an end, just like the wave that rolls on the ocean, a beginning and an end. And the body, the material body, has a beginning and an end. And we've had many material bodies over the course of many millions of years. So we have the spiritual side of us, which cannot be harmed by anything in the material world. It always thinks, the Gemut controls the thoughts and the feelings of the spiritual consciousness, and it always thinks in neutral positive terms. It's always in harmonious balance. Now the psyche, which controls the thoughts and the feelings of the material consciousness, is not always in harmonious balance. It can be very positive, it can be very negative. The goal is to keep the psyche in harmonious, equalized, neutral, positive balance, just like the Gemut. And that's when we get the great benefit in our life through the power of our own thoughts. You know, one of the things that I've been really learning from this book, The Way to Live, is how important striving is. Striving is a creational natural law. And without striving, if there is no striving, you will not evolve your consciousness. So it's a creational natural law that all living things have to strive. What that means is you have to work. But also with the human being, we should be continually learning. And that's why, in many ways, electronic media is dangerous, because it makes it very easy for us to zone out and stop learning. And you can watch YouTube videos, you can play on your phone, you can play on Facebook. These have very bad effects on our material consciousness. So try to limit your use of electronic media. And what that'll force you to do, what I'm trying to get to, is you'll have to pick up books and start reading them. And start reading, like, for example, The Way to Live by Edward Albert Meyer, or The Psyche. And it forces you to be more personally responsible. It's not easy, let me tell you, especially if you've become somewhat enamored with electronic media. So we have this thing called the spirit form, what comes into the body of the child 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. It goes into the superior colliculus, which is the part of the brain which controls sight. When the spirit form comes in, it also brings the material consciousness in. The material consciousness includes the subconscious, the unconscious, and the conscious mind, your personality. So there's a part of you which is basically lives forever, semyase, one of Billy's contacts, so that every person has within them a spirit that does not die, that does not sleep, that records all your thoughts and impulsations, and it will tell you if your thinking is right or wrong, if you've learned to pay attention to it. So the spirit form sends impulsations to the material consciousness. The Gemut also sends what's called the swinging wave to the material consciousness, and the material consciousness benefits from that to a certain extent. The swinging wave comes from the realm of cosmo-electronic, the realm of, what is, this is just the cosmo-electromagnetic life energy, the realm of cosmo-electromagnetic life energy. So the swinging wave, I often talk about, connects all animals. For example, when you see birds working in a flock, they move together in unison, partially because of the collective subconscious, but also because of this swinging wave. Connects all living creatures like this. The same way with schools of fish. Well, our spiritual consciousness sends the swinging wave to the material consciousness as well. One of the things that happens is, while the child is growing up, it gets inspiration from the subconscious. So, since the spiritual consciousness, the Gemut, has no direct connection with the body, one of the ways it influences the material consciousness is through this swinging wave. Let me read here. The Gemut supplies it with harmonious swinging waves in necessary amounts, in which case a part of these swinging waves originate from the realm of cosmic electromagnetic life energy. Now I wonder if that's referring to the spiritual realm. I don't know. I've never heard that really elaborated on yet in the Maya writings. Therefore, negative and positive are harmoniously equalized and also create a corresponding harmony which the Gemut absorbs and works with. So, one of the things that we have to always remember is we're working to be and maintain a harmonious balance, neither negative or positive. Now, also part of the human being is the mentality. And the mentality block is half material and it's half spiritual. The part of the mentality that's in the spiritual realm is neutral positive, balanced. The part that's in the physical realm can be unbalanced. It can be either completely neutral or completely positive. And there's a Sanskrit term that deals with the mentality called the manas. So the purpose of our life, the purpose of these many incarnations, is to evolve our consciousness. And what did Semyase tell Billy? Love and wisdom go together because the creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. So as we have these many reincarnations, we get more and more wisdom, and the spirit form is strengthened many, many times. And we continue to learn over these many, many lifetimes. We reincarnate into physical bodies, completely physical bodies, for what it says here in the book, The Psyche, for 42 million years. That's the fifth stage of human evolution. The Plejaren are in the fifth stage of human evolution. That's where people become kings of wisdom, Jschwisches. It's also called the Age of Recognitions. I think that's in Contact Report 5, where the Jschwisch can start to determine what his previous lives were and what he did in those previous lives. As the Jschwisch, you can do telepathy, telekinesis, levitation, teleportation, all sorts of amazing things. But most of us here on the earth are about 4 to 5 million years old in terms of our spiritual age, our spirit forms. Now, people who came here from other worlds, like I was talking about in Contact Report 70, and those people that died here are between 8 and 12 million years old in terms of their spiritual consciousness. Now, in order for the people of Earth to complete their evolution, we're going to have to leave the Earth. And that's what it says right here. When the human being of Earth will be able to do so, then he or she will have already long left the Earth and will be living somewhere on different planets, because the blue planet will not exist for as long as the human needs for his or her evolution. I find that very sobering, that in order to continue our evolution, we're going to have to leave the Earth. I think it's a true statement. I think we've probably taken things so far on this planet that we're going to have to, there's going to be a contingent of us that do leave in order to continue our evolution. So in case there's somebody coming to this show that doesn't know what I'm talking about, Edward Albert Meyer, he's about a 78-year-old man. He lives in a beautiful little mountain village called Hinterschmidruti in Switzerland. It's about 53 minutes east of Zurich by automobile. He's written 40 books. I've been reading a little bit of the Psyche for you, a little bit of the way to live, and the might of thoughts. He had his first extraterrestrial contacts back in 1945 when he was living in Bulak, Switzerland. he started getting telepathic messages from a man named Svath, who was nearing the end of his life. Svath was a Plejaren man. He was called, the Plejaren have been called the Pleiadians for many centuries. But they're not from our Pleiades. They're from a star system called the Plejaren star system. It's some 80 light years beyond our Pleiades in a different space-time configuration. Svath came here specifically to mentor Billy in his current lifetime, because Billy is here to give what are called the spiritual teachings to the people of the earth. And during this mission, and the reason he's written 40 books is because this spiritual teaching is being, for the first time, stored in written form. And it's mostly being stored in German. And we here in the United States are fortunate enough that people have gone through all the hard work of translating this material so that we have some of it in English, so we can start to piece this information together in English and start to make some sense out of it. Spock told Billy that he would have a very difficult life and told him to stay in the background. And that's why Edward Albert Meyer isn't on the news. He's not even a celebrity in the UFO world. Most of the UFO world overlooks his information. If you've studied it in any depth, you will start to understand that his material has all the answers, the big questions, the answers for the big questions in life. Who are we? Where do we come from? What's the purpose of our life? And part of the who are we and where do we come from, I was reading about earlier in Contact Report 70 and in Contact Report 59, where it explains that hundreds of thousands of years ago, during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria, during the time of Pelagon, extraterrestrials came to the Earth from other star systems, and they built civilizations. And these civilizations lasted for a while, for thousands of years in many cases. But then they destroyed themselves. After Pelagon died, Pelagon was 150,000 years ago, and he was a benevolent king of wisdom. But after he died, his successor was not so benevolent, and there was a great world war. And the same happened with Atlantis. And the war between Atlantis and Lemuria nearly destroyed the Earth. And my understanding was, or is, 11,500 years ago is when that great civilization came to an end. And we are the civilization that's come out of the rubble of Atlantis and Lemuria. So you could say we're a civilization who has forgotten who we are. We have amnesia, and we look around at these great megalithic and monolithic structures like the Great Pyramid, and we say, yeah, they must have done it with, X and Y and Z, when the obvious answer is these were very, very high technologies. The people that built these were very, very, very advanced, more advanced than we are. We cannot do the engineering required to build the Great Pyramid. So we today are in a very strange state where we don't know who we are, we don't know where we come from, and we don't know the purpose of our life. And the real answers are in this information that's being written by a very quiet man in Switzerland who is writing the most profound material on the planet. So I urge you to go to the Future of Mankind site and print out some of those contact notes. Don't read them from the screen. It's not good for your psyche. It's not good for your brain. But it's good if you print them out and read them. And if you can go to Michael Horn's site and maybe you can pick up some of these English translations and start to put this material together for yourself. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Might of Thoughts book, because I think it is very critical that we start to understand some of the principles. First of all, we have to learn to think in very absolute terms, because nature works in very absolute. We can no longer afford to be wishy-washy in our thinking. Let me read something to you here that talks about restlessness and what will happen to you as you get into this material. It says, the ideas, wishes, and imaginings, which are created by means of the thoughts, awaken a certain restlessness in them, by which they are driven on to action and to the realization of their thoughts. Consequently, they even use their free time and all their consciousness-based and material means, regardless of how small they may be, in order to develop and bring their wishes and imaginings to fruition. So as you study this material, you will find that it will awaken a restlessness in you, and you will even more focus on striving. And that's the creational natural law that I was talking about earlier. Striving. Every being on the planet is going to have to strive. The animals do it, the plants do it. The human being must strive to evolve his consciousness. The big distractions in our society today are and is the entertainment, specifically in the electronic media. And we're all going to have to wage this war to stay away from the distraction and follow our drive to strive. Let me continue here. Naturally, thereby also coming to the fore are all of the hidden, latent powers and resources which the human being only recognizes and experiences when he or she uses the might of thoughts in order to bring everything into fruition. The activity of the consciousness on the thoughts very quickly changes, and all the poverty and all kinds of problems can no longer be maintained. The discrepancy between the poverty or problems and the consciousness-based mental attitude quickly becomes so great that all the problems, the poverty, and the other burdening things vanish from the life of the thoughts exactly as if something unusable is thrown away. You are the master of the circumstances of your life. Your good thoughts will lead to good feelings. Good feelings will lead to good habits. Good habits will lead to good circumstances in your life. Your thoughts are a monstrous power that will continually bring into fruition everything that you desire, if those thoughts are neutral positive. So, monitor your own thoughts. And thoughts which are not neutral positive will produce in you feelings which are not neutral positive. So you need to go back and correct those thoughts, because your thoughts stream outward into the vast expanse of the universe, where they will gain power from other thoughts. And they will, if you had a neutral positive thought and it went out into the universe, it will come back to you as a healthy, neutral, positive thought. The only thing that will change in the boomerang effect is the polarity. So, if you are skewed a little bit too much to the positive in that healthy thought, it will still come back as a healthy thought, but it will be more to the negative. So you will see things from a slightly different perspective, That's the boomerang effect. The boomerang effect is there to keep us balanced, because everything in nature is designed to maintain this balance. Let me talk in the few minutes that remain about idleness. In idleness, only that which is unproductive, uncreative, and destructive arises. Let me stop right there. We are a society of entertainment, and we are a society that wants to get rid of the responsibility of thinking. And we're inundated by television, we're inundated by YouTube, we're inundated by distractions on cell phones. In idleness, only that which is unproductive, uncreative, and destructive arises. However, with assiduousness, everything progressive, ideal, constructive, and successful, and so forth arises. That is the creational natural law of striving. For that reason, the human being should bring to fruition that which is assiduous, positive, progressive, and promises success. Indeed, regardless of whether the striving for realization and the imagination wishes are low or high, or a mix of the two, the fact is that the human being is always attracted by and brings to fruition that which he or she consciously, secretly loves and strives for. Thus, that which comes into his hands is always the precise product of that which his or her own thoughts create. In this form, he or she always receives that which she actually earns, no more and no less. So the creational natural law of striving is even talked about in the Might of Thoughts, but in slightly different terms. Anyway, I appreciate the folks that have listened to this and the people that are listening to the archives. Keep striving. Keep printing out the Meyer material. Keep reading it. Don't succumb to electronic media. Hang in there. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great afternoon.